Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? I just learned something really important. When you're recording a video on your iPad and you get a phone call on your iPhone, it stops the video recording. And so I was just about done with this video and boom, my girlfriend called me and it was over. But anyhow, I'm not mad. It was just, it was entertaining is what it was. Anyhow, so what I want to talk about, I want to return to this subject of situational modifiers, tactical modifiers. I made a video a couple of days ago about that. And there was something I wanted to talk about that I didn't and just forgot to. So that's the nature of making videos, kids. You ought to try this sometime. Pretty cool. It's amazing like what can just leave your head when you're in the middle of a conversation. So anyhow, talking about that, I mentioned the fact that like it's fairly easy once you understand the game, once you understand how the mechanics work, to be able to adjudicate situational or tactical modifiers that don't exist in the text just based on what the other rules are. And you can kind of, you go watch that video if you want to hear me babble about that more. But the other part of that equation is remembering to actually use them. And here's something that it becomes like kind of like a game master and player conversation. And part of it is prior to the game, just saying we're going to try to use tactical or situational modifiers in the game to try to make it richer, to make it more involved and more interesting. And this covers the gamut from the modifiers that are already in the book, already part of the rules, and then the modifiers that are not. Things that they just forgot to put in there, or just because you can't put everything in there. Rule for everything. That's crazy, right? Anyhow, you got to remember who you're talking to, or who's talking to you, I suppose. But anyhow, at that point, part of the conversation you end up having, like after that initial thing, is both game master and player have to be really, they have to keep their eyes open and look for opportunities to narrate the environment, to use the environment, to take into consideration other things that are happening situationally, and thinking for a second, well, how would that affect the probabilities of success of whatever the player characters are trying to do, whether it's going to give them advantage or disadvantage. Is this going to give the opposition or just the other people in the world some kind of advantage or disadvantage they wouldn't normally have, and then figure out what that might be. So as you're a player, paying really close attention when the game master is narrating the terrain, like what the environment is like, and starting to think, can I use any of that to my advantage, just in a narrative sense, without even thinking about like, what would my numerical advantages or disadvantages be. It's my personal bent that I like to think of like, well, what would my character do in this situation based on their abilities, based on their background, who they are, based on their bent and what have you, and then try to use parts of the environment or whatever else. I'm using the environment in a broad sense, not just items or around a room. What would they do? How would they interact with their environment? How would they interact with the other people in the environment? What would they make use of things like cover or shade, or you get the idea, or just sand, throwing sand in somebody's eyes, whatever it happens to be, and then narrate appropriately. On the game master side, it's our responsibility to pay attention to what the players are doing, what they're narrating their characters doing, and decide for sit down and think for a second. Well, would that cause any kind of mechanical alteration to the die roll? Would this interject a modifier? Then figuring out what that might be and having the game move on. And this takes a little bit of Pluck practice. Sometimes you have to step out of character and kind of artificially say hey, I think this would maybe give me an advantage, or this might give you a disadvantage if you did this. But the goal, at least to me in those conversations, is to have, once we have a few of those conversations, just start to get on the same page, get in sync, and then not to have them anymore. It just becomes much more natural. As a player, you narrate things, and as a game master, you're assigning, any kind of modifiers, in the moment. And the other side of that conversation, I think I've talked about 5 sides of this conversation, haven't I? But is when you're a game master, sometimes it can be a bit tough to get your players to start to think like that, start to utilize the environment, start to look for ways to gain some kind of tactical advantage or whatever it happens to be, in whatever kind of scenario they're in, not just combat. The easiest way to get your players to do that, in my experience, is to have the bad guys do it. Once they see the people that are against them and their adversaries start to use things like the terrain or you know, or what have you, to their advantage, you know, ambushing people, whatever it is, and they see that also they're getting some kind of mechanical benefit for that. It's not just narratively, you know, scary. It's actually, you know, these guys have now got the upper hand on you. They will look for ways to do that themselves. So, and that's not a game master screwing the players. It's just kind of a gentle prompt to think outside the box and start to, you know, imagine. I guess be more immersive. Imagine yourself actually in that in that world, and what would what would your character do in that situation? You know, I loved it when Anthony narrated this great environment for me in our All for One Regime Diabolique solo session. An environment in this alleyway which I was not able to use because I was guarding this character that had frozen, become completely immobile. And so it was great. He's narrating all the stuff to me. I'm thinking about all the things that Philippe could do, because Philippe is very much a cinematic sort of fellow, and he can't leap on all this furniture and everything, you know, doing these cool things to defeat the ruffians, because he's protecting, you know, young Armand at that moment. Anyhow, you know, the last part of this video, this is not a video about 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons at all. So, you know, some people did, you know, mention, well, how come you mentioned, you know, 5th edition D&D in your initial video? And I thought, you know, John from Red Dice Diaries had mentioned that game. It could have been a different one, so my mistake. But you know, it brings up a good point about the advantage and disadvantage mechanic in 5th edition D&D. So I'm just going to talk about that a little bit in a global way, not just D&D, 5th edition D&D, but some other games that use something similar. This is a mechanic, or mechanics like that I am so on the fence, you know, about. It's unbelievable. Now, I haven't come down on either side. I have this love-hate relationship with this mechanic, and if you're not, you know, certain what the mechanic is, at least in, like, say, 5th edition D&D, it's D20 roll. So you're going to roll 2 D20. If you have advantage, you're going to take the highest one. So I roll them, and let's see, I got a 5 and a 20. Yeah, I got a 20. You know, if I had disadvantage, then I would be forced to take the lowest roll, in which case I rolled a 5 in that example. And you know, the thing about this mechanic and mechanics like it that I like is it's very elegant. It's very simple. It's boom. There's no math required at that point. You just take the highest die. It speeds the game along. I really, really like that, because sometimes it could be very unwieldy to stack up all these modifiers and, you know, whatever. There's a couple parts I don't like. The first part is that it doesn't allow you to differentiate between different levels of situations. In other words, there's just the advantage, disadvantage. There's just this roll. That's it. You roll 3d20, it's ridiculous. You know, that's just game breaking at that point. So you're kind of stuck with that one modifier, as opposed to saying, well, you know, hey, if you get this much cover over here, maybe you get a +2 or to your armor class. But if you get a whole bunch of cover, maybe you get a +8. It takes that away. The other part about it is that the way, and I made some videos about this, so I may link them to this one, the way the curve actually works, it's not a straight up modifier. In the dead center, if you need to roll an 11 to do whatever it is you're supposed to do, 11 or higher, rolling this 2d20 gives you a +5 modifier. However, if you need something like an 18 or 19 or 20, it comes a lot closer to like a +2 and eventually to like almost just like a +1. So, you know, for my money, you know, when I'm a player and I'm looking to get the upper hand, it's usually when I have very little chance of success. So I'm looking for that die roll of, say, 18 or 19. And I put myself in whatever position it is, and I get a little bit of a benefit. Maybe I get a +1.5, +2 benefit for setting myself up. However, if it's relatively easy to do something, you know, it's dead set in the middle, you know, then all of a sudden I get a +5. You know, so at that point I probably would have hit the guy anyway. So that's the other that's one of the negatives. The second negative. One of the things I liked as a fix, and I made a video about this, but I'm just going to interject it here again. You know, is the idea that, you know, when you roll these 2d20, despite the fact that there's a curve, it gives you a nut +3.35. That's the average it's going to give you, if you wanted to know. But I thought, you know, hey, why don't you give somebody almost the same exact net benefit, but allow them to maybe have something like a +4 or +5, you know, when they need a natural roll of 19 or 20. Not a guarantee, but a possibility. And so you roll a d20 and a d6, and then you just add them together. So in this case, I get a 20 and a 1, you know, 21. Not so bad, you know. Let's see, the next one, 8 and a 6. So I've got I got a 14 in that case. Pretty cool, you know. So I got a +6 on that next roll. Anyhow, you get the idea, even though they came out just about exactly the way they would in the regular 2d20 roll, because that's the nature of random dice. And it's funny, when I mentioned that, I made that video, I think afterwards, I was, Matt Finch, the guy, Swords and Wizardry guy, was talking about, looking for some kind of alternative to the advantage, disadvantage, and I mentioned that, and he said, that's really weird, I just thought of the same thing. So I guess great minds think alike. So, there you go. I'm at least as smart as Matt Finch. How about that? Take it easy, kids.